Nice to meet you. All right, so welcome to the podcast. It sounds so cheesy to say out loud, but I'll probably edit that. All right. Serious. All right. Hey, welcome to the podcast. Today I have Haley Pryor, who is a track coach at Rhodes College. I will let you give a little bit more thorough introduction of yourself and your coaching and athletic background.
Sure. So my name's Haley Pryor. I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri, and I've been in Memphis ever since. I went to Rhodes here in town. I pole vaulted there. And after I graduated, they basically needed a coach and asked me to step on full-time, but part-time. I'm not there every day, but I coach the pole vaulters and have been doing it ever since.
Okay. So the reason I wanted to have you on is because you have a unique experience of not only being a collegiate athlete, being a coach, and compared to most of the coaches that I know, they've been like out of their sport for a long time as far as a player. So I think the first thing I wanted to kind of start with is just your sporting background, like growing up into college and whatnot.
Sure. Yeah. Me and my friends were actually just talking about this with the psychology aspect, but I grew up as a gymnast for about 11 years or so. I started really young. And then I'm very tall, so I know you can't really see that now, but I'm almost 6 feet. And I got humbled very quickly when I started like puberty and that teenager years and just didn't become as successful as I wanted to as a gymnast, and then was just kind of exploring options, tried everything after I quit gymnastics, and what stuck was pole vaulting because my dad kind of got me into it, and then volleyball. And I played basketball, hated it. I love watching it, hated playing it. Tried diving, and then throughout high school I played volleyball and I swam in the winter and pole vaulted in the spring.
Okay. I'm fascinated about pole vaulting because I'm like some states have like outlawed that in javelin, and I wasn't sure what Missouri had ever did, but I think Illinois had banned it for like high school or something.
Possibly.
Like
I know there's some like weigh-ins. There's different rules, and especially the high school level where you have to wear helmets in some states.
Not knowing that.
You have to like weigh in because some of the poles have a weight on it. It's not. Pole vaulting is a very interesting sport altogether, but there's a lot of different rules. But yeah, we had it in high school. My coach was Jeff Hartwig, who was a previous American record holder, so I was really lucky to have him as my coach. Then I came to Memphis or Rhodes in Memphis and continued my pole vaulting career.
Okay. Is pole vaulting what brought you to Rhodes, or were you?
There was like a mixed bag of things. I knew I wanted to play sports in college, but it wasn't necessarily, I didn't want to do it as my job. Was I even like good enough to go D1? Probably not. But even if I could or walked on, I wanted something that was just a good balance for me. So Rhodes offered, I know I talked to Coach Shankman, who is still the head coach there at Rhodes, and he called me and recruited me for track. I toured the school, talked to the volleyball coach because I was like, well, if I'm here, I might as well try both. And they were happy to have me walk on. And I only did that my freshman year. Two sports was just a lot to handle. And track was kind of more of my focus at that point. But I wanted to come down to Memphis, get a little further away from home. And Rhodes had a really good academic reputation. So it just seemed like a good fit.
Can you talk a little bit about the balance aspect? Because I know everyone, I think, kind of wants to go like D1 right out the bat, but then when people get to their senior year and they really start thinking about college, that balance piece, a lot of athletes talk about, or student athletes, they talk about the struggle of trying to balance being a full-time athlete and a full-time student.
It was definitely hard to kind of outwardly look at what my career and athletics could have been, because I was like, yeah, I want to go D1. Everyone wants to go D1, like you said, but I just kind of thought about it, and I had friends who did end up going D1, and they're like distracted by sport. They're sport all the time, not even distracted, but they distracted from their academics. And I knew, I was pretty focused on my academics throughout high school and all that, and just I did sports for fun, and I got competitive, of course, but it was more of like, that was my release after, 7 hours of school or something. I could go play a sport, and I had volleyball, which was more of that team aspect. So I got to be with my friends and my teammates. And then I had track, which of course you still have that team camaraderie, but it was more, you were kind of your own boss in a sense. Like you showed up for yourself, and it was more of that like individual sport mindset that was kind of challenging in its own right.
Yeah. What would you say when you look back as your time coming in as a student athlete in the college, and then also looking at it from a perspective of a coach now, what is like the most, I guess, what's the biggest difference that you've noticed about that as you look back at your experience, and even current student athletes that you coach?
Personally, the difference that I've experienced is I'm a lot more nervous as a coach. Me and my friend, actually just last night, she coaches high jump, and we're both laughing about, you can see us in pictures off on the sidelines, like doing the motions as our kids are jumping. And as an athlete, I was just kind of like, all right, let's go. Like I was more mentally tough as an athlete than I am as a coach. But from like the perspective of like the sport itself, I do think like the mental toughness it needs to be talked about a little bit more. And I think, we were just told to be tough when I was an athlete. And there's more of a conversation of, okay, you don't have to be like so rigid all the time. There's room for, that emotion, and being a little lax on like, don't be so hard on your athletes. But sometimes I think, I've seen people lose that, focus really, not easily, but I think more than I think my teammates did, which is interesting. But, they might have a better balance of expressing when they're upset than we did too. But that's kind of, over the last couple of seasons, I've been like, all right, let's get back in focus. Don't let, your teammates dropping the baton or coach saying maybe something that you didn't want to hear affect the way you're going to compete or things like that. And they're like, okay.
As you were talking about that, something popped up in my head that I'm really curious on your perspective of. What differences do you see with incoming athletes prior to COVID happening and the ones that came with COVID? Because I see it from a psychologist perspective, but I'm curious from your perspective.
I mean, it did a doozy on, obviously throughout the country and the world, but athletes specifically, it's definitely different. Especially not being able to train those couple of years, or, not being able to compete. I think being at home too, it is interesting because for a lot of people pre-COVID, you had different adults in your life that gave you structure if you were an athlete. And not having that for a year or two, I can imagine you probably, like, especially going into college, you don't have those other adults in your life other than your parents possibly to kind of show you what to do or where to go or how to live. And a lot of that, not saying like all of these kids now aren't responsible, but I think it does affect the way that they can stand up for themselves. And, they didn't have that in high school of that accountability. And so it's kind of a later learned thing, which that's why I'm a little more lenient with my freshmen, sophomores, or at least the last couple of years, where it's like they might not have had that sort of accountability or needed to have it because they were at home for 2 years and couldn't really compete and might have given up on that. But I think I've seen it in the last like year or so where those freshmen are a little not far past COVID by any means, because it sure affected their middle school experience or whatever it might have been in that time frame. But they're starting to see like the importance of showing up on time and listening to your coaches and, having all of their stuff prepared and not forgetting their spikes at home, which we saw a lot of in that, 2021, 2022 seasons where I'm like, God, kids, what are you doing? Like, but then, they just didn't have to for a couple of years. So it's like a relearned sort of mindset, which is interesting. It's frustrating and I love them, but it's getting better, I think, too.
I'm laughing because I was like, oh, I remember in high school, like you leave something at home and it's like,
oh my gosh, and
I
you're
gotta
like,
go
Mom,
run.
can you bring me my spikes? Because they're on the track back at my home or my home school. And it's like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, my mom was like, too bad, better walk and get them. And so, but yeah, that accountability piece, because I think just working with college students as a psychologist, the accountability piece is like they had a lot of flexibility, but then also it's like there's a lack of innate structure when everything's at home. It's like, I mean, I can do class in my bed. I can do it at the table. Like the lecture's recorded. I can go watch it, a couple of days. Even college students where it was like, I watched all the lectures for the semester the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And it's like, I hadn't done anything. And it's like, now they're grinding to catch up. And it's like, cool if you can do that.
But if not.
Yeah. And it's like, what happens when you have something that you can't put off to the last minute that you really got to chip away at and it's for a job. And so, I think that COVID piece is kind of like, that's a prime year of like developing some consistency. And I know for me, sports was something that really helped with I'm very disorganized and whatnot. And so sports is like, well, I don't want to touch that line. So I got to be here early. We got to leave at this time and make sure
practice is from 5 to 8 and I'm exhausted after. So I've got to get my homework done from 8 to 10 and then I'm in bed.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was like, I think high school, I don't think I was late more than when I started driving, at least, especially. I wasn't late more than I think twice ever. And if I was, I had a real good reason. And I had called the coach in college. It was one time. That was it. I overslept and never again.
Never again.
And so I think the other thing I'm curious of, because you were talking about there's a way in which athletes aren't as mentally tough. And the way you spoke about it was acknowledge the fact that like from a coaching perspective, it's like trying to be more positive, trying to like making sure the distinction between being assertive versus being like hostile, like some coaches are, is like clearly that's there, but still it's like some of them, it sounds like struggle with that assertiveness. And that's where I start to wonder like the impact of like social media, because I think young adults are so exposed, especially the current young adults coming into college, they're so exposed to things of being scrutinized with social media. Like, I'm just wondering what toll does that take for when they do make it? It's like, okay, you drop a baton. It's like, yeah, don't do that ideally. It's going to happen. How do you pick yourself up and start over? And it's like they don't have that resiliency, let alone just a mental fortitude to begin with the same way. And I'm just kind of thinking like if from your perspective, from what you've seen in your own experiences, any role that social media has kind of maybe played in that.
That's interesting too, because I remember, I graduated in 2016, so there was still like Instagram, but it wasn't as big. Even in 2012 through 2016 that it is now, or TikTok or all of this other stuff. But I think like on top of social media or like even the posts that our school shared, it was like, hey, this person won, this is person athlete of the week, this team did X, and it's a lot more social media presence than it ever was. So when, especially my team, Rhodes women's track had won 15 conferences in a row, I believe, 14 or 15. So we had always like that target on our back. And I guess it's not necessarily social media at that point, but it was for our team specifically, like that pressure to win, because you have that streak and you're like, well, we had one event that screwed up and now our dreams are over. And it's like, no. There's still a lot of chip away points that you can score, especially in track, top 8 score points. So it was like, sure, we were supposed to win the 4x1 or whatever it was. We can still get 8th, 7th in shot put or whatever other event that we're not typically going to win, but we can get those like little points to catch up. And that's an interesting question. I know, like social media, I don't really know what the kids' perspective on it is as much as a coaching perspective, because I never have thought about it like that. So I don't really have the best answer for that, but I'm sure like the perfection chasing that, like picture perfect Instagram post, like, oh, we won, like, look at us, is probably not in the front of their minds, but is something that probably does affect them. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think for me that question popped up because in the past I've had clients come in who've been like devastated because somebody like broke their Snapchat streak, and they took it. It's like, and I'm like,
You're taking that personally?
I'm like, and like literally, like they're coming in for like they're legit in crisis. Like I'm like, do I need to hospitalize this person? Because wait, what?
I
And I'm
know.
like, don't judge it, don't judge it. That's a real thing
That's
for them.
for them, yeah.
I'm gonna let it. I'm not gonna judge it. I'm just gonna make sure that they're safe and whatnot. And so I think, there is a certain level of scrutiny that I think athletes are under. I think especially female athletes, like they've been under a lot more scrutiny with social media. I mean, compared to anything where it's like, even if you could be from middle of nowhere, no one knows you, but then there's a lot more scrutiny that goes on, and even just women's sports in general, and that's a whole other topic
story.
that we could get into another time. What was the transition out of sport like for you? Because I know that's something that's been kind of talked about a little bit more on current athletes, professional, college, and also like a lot of athletes are like starting podcasts and whatnot. Clearly, I'm joining them.
Join that club.
But I'm curious, like, what was the transition out of sport for you? Like, what was that like?
It was not like hard. It wasn't the hardest thing I've ever done. But since I was like 3, I've had structure of sports after school every single day, or traveling for competitions on the weekend and things like that. So I didn't have that. I didn't have for sprinters, you can kind of come on the track and sign up to be not a free agent, unattached at track meets. Volleyball, like you can find leagues, and other sports, there's platforms around town everywhere in the country that you can usually pick up and do, whereas pole vault is a very expensive hobby. And luckily, I was able to kind of play around a little bit with just being able to coach at Rhodes, but I didn't have anything that like I could do every day. So I really didn't have a sport. I didn't find 901 volleyball, which how we met, until almost 2019. So for about 3 years, I was just going to the gym, like willy-nilly, making up my own workouts. Didn't really play volleyball much. I had coaching for the track team, but didn't really ever think I didn't even want to participate at the time. But I missed it for sure, like having a team. I think that's why I fell in love with coaching so much, was it kept me in the sport that I loved, and it had kept me with a team, that I loved, and showing up for those kids, well, adults, young adults. But when I found 901 volleyball in 2019, that's when I like fell in love with volleyball over again. I was like, wow, I missed having a sport to like compete and try to work at again, because I hadn't played for like 6 or 7 years, so it was not that great when I started out. I also started up with CrossFit in about 2019 or 2020, which, I was kind of sick of writing my own workouts and just, not having any real purpose other than moving. And then also, CrossFit sometimes offers up like, hey, beat the person next to you. And I was like, okay, I like that. I missed having that little competitive edge for fun.
I know so I played football, high school, a little bit in college, and it's like you could go do a semi-pro thing, but it's not really the same. Or it's like, even if you do certain leagues. And so I know a lot of people who have just gone into like during like kind of more structured sports, which I think that's one of the reasons why I do love volleyball, because it can get extremely competitive depending on like how much money and time you got to put in to play at a certain level. You can go around the country and it's like, oh, that guy.
Or you can sign up for the beer league, and
and
you can pick and choose when you want to show up and like get after it.
Right. And then I know a lot of people also, they go into CrossFit for the same thing of like, it's that sense of community, like having people cheer for you, having people, talk smack.
Push you and talk smack,
And it's like, it's
or put up a better number, and you're like, I think I could beat him. So I got to work a little harder.
And then I know just like with, because I remember hearing about CrossFit when it was I was doing my master's. I remember the strength coach was starting to incorporate a lot of CrossFit stuff for a lot of the different sports, especially like a lot of the Olympic sports. And it was kind of getting a little big, and then it really exploded.
Yeah.
And the time that it exploded, I had just moved out to California. And so it was just like,
Probably everywhere.
yeah, it's like everybody's trying to do like kipping pull-ups and everything. You're just like, I just want to use a squat rack.
Yeah, I remember a lot of people, not a lot of people, but a few people were like, you should try it. You should try it. And I, of course, you know, I think when anyone who doesn't do it, they're like, okay, it's a little culty. And it's like, you're like kipping pull-ups aren't real. Like, and sure, you know, it is also a little culty, and kipping pull-ups aren't as hard as strict pull-ups, but everyone knows that.
Yeah.
But when I started doing it, I was like, wow, this actually combines a lot of my gymnastics background, lifting, which is what we like did throughout college to help with track as an accessory, and cardio. I was like, it's the three things that I like doing, so I'll give it a try. And then I caught the bug, and I sometimes take a few months out of a break just from doing it every day or whatever, and just kind of taking a step back and just going and doing a lift day on my own, or just training for whatever, a 5K, or I've done the St. Jude half a couple times, not fast, but I will like take a break from CrossFit just to like, you know, cleanse the palate a little bit too, because it can get to be a lot.
You said the three things, like, okay, I don't have a gymnastics background. The cardio things that got me with CrossFit. I have horrible endurance. Like, I can sprint, and that's about it. And it's, anything's like, going to run how far? I remember high school, I did track my senior year, and I told somebody tried to get me to run like the distance medley relay. They wanted me to do the mile. They're like, you could walk it. We just want to do it for fun. I was like, I'll quit before I do that.
Rather not.
So you talked about, having volleyball, having CrossFit helped you with that transition, and also coaching. What about just in terms of like identity, like how you saw yourself and that piece? Because I think that's something else that doesn't get talked about, is like that I'm an athlete, and it's like, I mean, I'm still an athlete, I'm still athletic. I don't play for anybody, and then moving into your career and building that kind of like professional / coaching identity.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I still consider myself an athlete, and I don't think that's ever going to go away. But what's interesting, I think with any sport, but I'll say particularly pole vaulting, I kept it on my resume just because it was a conversation starter. And every interview I ever went on, they were like, pole vaulting, tell me about that. And so I still have it on my resume if I ever, need to use that again, because it's a conversation starter. And I think as an athlete too, a lot of companies or whatever, whoever you're interviewing with, will see that as an athlete, especially if you went through college. You're obviously a committed person. You're willing to show up, put in the work. And I think it's super important for athletes to not, write that off as soon as they graduate, or even high school. Like, if that's something that you've committed to your whole life, like, talk about it. Because it, I think it had helped me outside of whatever GPA, whatever work experience I had. Well, I guess coaching is still work experience, but yeah, having that as just hey, this is also what I do for fun. But it helped every conversation in an interview. It started with, tell me about pole vault. And I was like, sure, let's talk about it. And I think it helped with, they remember the girl that pole vaulted, So I do think it's important to kind of carry that athletic identity into your professional life. I think that's totally appropriate.
What is your coaching philosophy?
So for me, and I think it'll change based on the age that you do coach and the level. But I mean, I coach 18 to 23-year-olds that are at a D3 college. And, I want to push them. I'm never, yelling except for cheering. But I never really get upset with them unless it's something about like accountability. Like, you didn't tell me you're going to be late, or, you know, you didn't, not even related to pole vault or track or anything like that. It's just like you were late, you know, didn't hold yourself accountable, you didn't hold your teammate accountable, you walked away and you should have been cheering for your teammates. Like, those are the things that I would not necessarily get angry about, but those are the only things that I'd be like, you guys really need to get it together. But other than that, I think I'm a pretty positive reinforcement type of coach. I think even sometimes my athletes are like, you can get a little harder on us. Like, we don't mind. And I'm like, oh man, I was just so used to it being inflicted on me for so long. I was like, I don't want to be like that. But I do understand, like, some people need to be pushed in different ways. But I also too think, as much as I want them to succeed, if they don't, having that kind of outward looking in, this is D3 athletics. It's important, but you're so much more than just an athlete. You can use it, like I said, you can keep that with you in all of the different aspects of your life, but you're more than that. And if you mess up, or if you succeed even, don't get a big head. Like, this is still just what you signed up to do. You're showing up because you wanted to. Which I think maybe could be different if I was coaching D1 athletes that were getting scholarship or things like that. But
NIL.
yeah, yeah. But D3 can get NIL too.
Yeah,
So we don't have any athletes like that just yet. But I don't know. I think having a bad day, you know, my coach when I was a freshman, he told me, you know, some days you got to eat a shit sandwich. And I was like, you know, not every day you're going to PR. Not every day you're going to have the best practice. So it's okay to just be like, shake it off. We'll get back after it tomorrow or the next day. So I try to be kind of lighthearted. And I only come in twice a week for coaching, and because they don't pole vault every day, they do other training throughout the week. So I like to be a breath of fresh air and, you know, support them all I can, and also support them off the field, I guess is what you'll call it. Like, I try to be available to them if they ever have questions. And especially at Rhodes too, I'm the only female coach. So even though I only have like 5 pole vaulters, I coach the men and the women. But for the women's side, generally, I try to offer, you know, just my support if they ever need anything from like a woman's perspective, or just coming to a coach with something that they might not feel comfortable with talking to our male staff.
So there's like 3 things there, so I got to pick one that I want to touch on. I think the first one was, you talked about like how, you know, you are assertive with and consistent with your athletes, more or less, where you're not like just like hard on them just to be hard or whatnot. And they're kind of like, it could be a little tougher on. And you're like, yeah, okay, if that's what you need.
Yeah.
And you mentioned in there, like, you know, you had some coaches that were just like, it kind of sounds
Growing
like.
up, for sure.
And I think the reason that stuck out to me is a while back I was having a conversation with a friend of like, you know, the coaches that you remember the most are like the ones that I think that people hated. It's like made you not want to show up every single day. Just like more or less it kind of got to the point it's like, yeah, you're kind of not a good coach, let alone a good person. I don't do the good bad person thing often. It's like, I think especially at like I see like the youth level where it's like people are like berating. I'm like, that's a kid.
Kids.
Like literally they're 8.
Yeah.
Like, and you're yelling at them like I remember I worked with a coach who he tried to make the players run because like they were late, but it was like a bad accident where it was like even some of the players that were late still got there like 20 minutes before the head coach. And the head coach was like, why are you making them run? Like the highway was shut down.
Yeah.
And he was like, well, they need to be accountable. It was like, how are you accountable for
They
a
can't
car
predict
accident?
accidents on the highway.
And it was like literally everybody, like the coach was like, I left early and I'm still like an hour late.
Yeah.
And so I guess for you, when you think about like whether as a coach that you had specifically or just that you saw treat another athlete poorly, like what role, if any, does that play in like your coaching philosophy and how like you try to just really treat people?
Don't be like them. I'm lucky I haven't had many coaches like that. They do exist, but you know, I think back and like, especially for women, I don't know, for me, I can handle, you know, criticism, and I can handle you kind of getting in my face and telling me to, buck up. But I mean, don't yell at me. I'm a kid, or I'm here for fun. I can easily just quit. And what are you going to do about it? Like, I just don't think that philosophy really works. I'm sure plenty of men don't like getting yelled at either, but it's just such a stigma that they're like, oh yeah, I'm tough and can handle it. But so, like, raising your voice, getting pissy, it's just not productive to me. Which I think is, I mean, you're the psychologist, but like, you would know, like, positive reinforcement doesn't just work for dogs, it works for humans. And I think what I want to be remembered as a coach is like someone that picks you up, not someone that they're like going to graduate and be like, oh my God, I hated going to practice. Because, like I said, it's not productive for the athlete, it's not productive for me. And it's just, I try to make it fun for everyone. And outside of, like, when they graduate, I've had athletes that I like am now friends with. So I just like having that sort of positive relationship with them, for sure.
That's what I was mentioning about earlier. Like, it's great until you hear all the motorcycles that go down the street really loud. Because I think one of the things I've kind of recognized doing this work is that it's, the importance of communication. And it's like, if a person is quick to yell, it's probably indicative of they're not very good at their communication.
Right.
And it's like, you can say one thing one way for a person to get, and this other person won't get it. Like, I was that kid where it was like, I run a play one way, and coach was like, great, flip around, do it the other way. And I'm like, they're like, dude, just do it the other direction.
Yeah.
It was a whole new play to me. And so I appreciate the coaches that were, sure, they got frustrated, and they're frustrated, they're still going to try to hold me accountable. Like, you got to do the work, whatever it is, to know what you're doing. Because we can't put you out there and have you just run plays one direction, because everyone's going to know what you're doing. And so I think that part's really, really big. Yeah, I
agree. I have told my athletes, because especially with, a lot of sports, but pole vaulting, really technical. There are 100 little pieces to fix or to tweak every single jump. And so it's not just like you do the same thing every time. So I try to, if something isn't clicking for one athlete, rephrasing it for them in a way, or, describing it in a way, or creating some fun analogy in a way that they can understand it. But if that doesn't work for that or another athlete, like, I'll just stick to what I'm used to saying for whatever. So I try to tell them, like, whatever works, like, whatever clicks, whatever cue works for you, I'm going to change the way that, like, I communicate with you.
Yeah, it's like what I tell people is, like, I try to have 30 different ways of saying the same exact thing, because, like, you never know. It's like, these 15 work, but then this 30th one that I never really use, that's
might
the
work
one
for
that,
one person.
Yeah, that clicked with a person. I'm wondering what comes up for you as you look at, like, how there's so much conversation about mental health in sport, as well as also just the mental aspect of sport from a performance enhancement piece. Because I would assume that when you were playing and competing, that conversation wasn't as salient as what it is today. Is that a correct assumption?
Just like generally with your mental, kind of keep it. Well, I just think, like, the conversation wasn't as fluid, and if you went off track, there wasn't a conversation about how to get you back on. It was like, oh, well, you obviously don't care. And it's like, no, I care. I'm just having this, mental break or whatever, or funk, that I just need your help to get me back. Whereas I think now the conversation is like, okay, you fell off. How can we get you back on? And how can I help? Where I just remember growing up, it's like, yeah, I cried at practice because I got yelled at and I'm upset, or I'm upset with myself more than you yelling at me. And we would get told to kind of go off to the side, and no one would come over and, like, talk to you. I think now if that ever happens, I think giving someone space is important too. But I'm never going to just be like, all right, time out. Like, if you, walk off, come back, let's talk, and maybe not in the moment when everyone's focused, but maybe later when there's an appropriate time, like just to get you back on track. I think it's happening more because more people are comfortable with expressing like a distaste or, getting, I mean, a lot more things are going on in the world now than just focusing on your sport. So I think it's easier for people to get anxious or get upset. And then now we're like, okay, we're seeing that more. Let's have a conversation of how to not fix it, but, how to help you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, because I think I stumbled into sports psychology. It was kind of like I was getting ready to graduate, found out about it, and I was like, that sounds like something I'm interested in. And I knew I wanted to definitely, I got my degree in psych, my bachelor's, but I found out sports psych, then went and got my master's and was like, yeah, we need to get this doctorate. So I decided to do that. And even it's been interesting that I think how much now you see so many pro athletes, college athletes, and even some high school athletes really talking about the mental health aspect in terms, or let me back up, the mental side of it in terms of like, I'm stressed, I'm anxious. It's not necessarily a clinical thing or anything like that. It's more like a performance kind of thing.
Right.
If something happens where coach is like, no, it's like, let me not alienate this person and just have them sit out there. 'Cause especially they're like younger athletes, it's kind of like, you got to kind of go console them a little bit. It's like, they're like a 12-year-old. You don't just let them sit in the corner like being yelled at because then they're thinking they're the worst kid in the world.
Right.
But even college athletes where it's like sometimes coaches like, they'll be really tough and they kind of come check back in because young adults still kind of do the same thing of they think my coach hates me. And it's like, no, your coach doesn't hate you. They're pissed.
Yeah.
They don't hate you though. And it's kind of like there's that aspect. And then there is the mental health piece of itself where it's like the transition into college or injuries. Breakups is another thing that happens with it. It's like that's a thing that college athletes could be their first relationship they have a breakup, and they think, well, no one's going to care about me, and it's a lot of things that come up. And so what about, I guess, more like what most people would consider to be like the mental health piece of like, this is something like we're moving into, where it's like we got to get you some support. What have you seen change from coming in, playing, and then transitioning to being a coach, and just the kind of current state of affairs with mental health and whatnot?
I think I think it needs to be talked about more, or at least, it needs to be brought to light a little bit more, because there is kind of that blurred line of, okay, this person has like a mental health condition or something like that. And then this person is just dicking around and not focused, but they're maybe the coach can't see, or the athlete thinks like, well, because I'm stressed, I can't do this. And they're like, well, you're stressed because you're not sleeping, because you're staying out late, because you're not doing your homework. Like, you're kind of doing it to yourself. And I understand that's a stressful thing, right? Whereas this person might have insomnia. Like, that's why they're not sleeping or whatever, you know what I mean? But I do think with talking about mental health, a lot of people might not understand it, even though that's being talked about. So it might be more, not an excuse, but just they don't know how to navigate it. Or I think mental toughness is a totally different thing than a mental health issue. Like, if you're not mentally tough, that doesn't mean you have a mental health problem, you know what I mean? But so like certain things you're able to work on it a lot more than where a coach could be like, okay, you're suffering with anxiety and it's a clinical problem. Like, sports obviously aren't your biggest issue right now, or like performing in sports isn't. So let's get you help. Whereas you do your homework on time. Like, you can treat your kids differently based on their behaviors or how much they do actually talk to you about what they're dealing with. But yeah, I think the more we talk about it, the more questions people are going to have. but the more answers there will be too. So I think it's just a journey that you got to figure it out. And some kids are just going to annoy you. And some kids that won't ever learn, or they'll quit, or they'll still be the star athlete and they're just got to have a chip on their shoulder. And then there's other athletes that might quit because they just truly can't handle doing all the things at once because they're overwhelmed, they're stressed, they're anxious, and it's something that, you know, needs to be maybe monitored more. And I think I've seen it a little bit more. I don't know if we had athletes like on the team that really, I'm sure we did, but it just wasn't talked about. But I see it a little bit more with athletes now, that especially through coaching, that I'm like, okay, well, you know, let's prioritize, or, you know, not bottle it up, but put it in a box for the meet tomorrow, and then let's open back up. Because there are certain people, or like your teammates are expecting you to show up for them. Like if you went through a breakup, they're like, yeah, be sad. It's okay to be sad, but you've got a team that you also are on and that you got to support, and you got to do your job. So if it's, you know, the worst thing that happens if you don't show up, you know, they'll be mad at you, or they'll be upset, and you'll be upset because they're upset, and then you're also upset because of what else is going on behind the scenes. So I think the things you can control, you can be upset behind the scenes, but if you show up and do your best, at least, you don't have to win or whatever, but if you do, then at least you can say, I showed up for that side, and then I won't be upset about that, but I'll be upset in the background, and we'll deal with it later.
I think that compartmentalization piece is like, that is something that as human beings we have to do. Like,
Yeah,
you know,
you got to do it sometimes.
For people that like I use for when I work with clients that have kids, it's like, hey, you might be in a bad mood someday and whatnot, or have something going on, and you got to compartmentalize that to make sure that you do X, Y, and Z for your kids, because they can't do it.
They got to, yeah,
you know?
they need you.
And if you don't, then things can pile. It's like, now this happens, this happens. Like, don't let things, like you said, don't let things build up. Don't let things get to that point where you have way more stressors now.
Yeah.
And just with what you know, working with college students, one of the things I tell them is like, hey, reach out to your professor. Don't just say nothing. Reach out to your coach. Don't just say nothing.
Yeah.
Because you're not letting other people do what they can to help you.
Yeah.
And then it just looks like, oh, well, you just aren't trying, or you just are being lazy or whatever. And it's like, no, this is going on. You checked in with me about it from the get-go. You know what? Don't worry about this assignment. Or somebody was saying, I can't remember who it was, but they were saying that like their coach gives them like two, maybe it was a sports psychologist talking about this, but more or less like certain programs were giving athletes like 1 or 2 mental health days where it's like, you can take off.
No questions asked.
Just let us know you're using one of your mental. That's it, plain and simple. No questions asked. Coach is cool with it. You know, and that did a lot for them. And it was like letting athletes know, like, don't abuse this, because we're asking the coaches to be flexible, and this is putting their job on the line, because it's like, you just didn't show up.
Yeah.
Now team chemistry or the playbook they were going to run is different. And it's like, we don't win this game, I might get fired. And so I think that's that piece. And then even what you mentioned with like the blurred lines is that I think that's one of the reasons why I was like, yeah, let me go ahead and get my doctorate in clinical psych, as opposed to doing like sports psychology, where I'm like studying it more research wise and focus only on like mental performance. Because it's like what a lot of people struggle with is knowing, it's like, well, when is this a mental health issue? It's like, well, I get anxious. It's like, that isn't necessarily a mental health issue just because you get anxious. And it could be. How do you differentiate? You know, and the example I use with people is, I get anxious shooting free throws. I can still shoot them and do pretty well. I just get anxious and it throws me off a little bit, versus I get so anxious shooting free throws that I can't even walk up to the free throw line in a game. Yeah. Or when I do, it's like, I'm missing.
Total choke.
And it's like, or golfing, like the yips. It's like, oh, I got to try to make this putt. It's like, that's where it's like, this is a little bit more clinical, or can start to be building to something clinical. And so even though I draw that distinction, I'm in favor of like the mental skills part, because a lot of those things are just general coping skills that people can use for different aspects of life, period. And it's like, you got that. I've had some people say, it's like, I didn't learn this from anyone, not my parents or anybody, about like you said, hey, I'm really emotional right now. Let me walk over here,
Yeah.
take 5,
Oh,
10
it's hard
minutes.
to admit, like,
Yeah.
even now, but it's like, it's still gotta, if it happens, it's okay. But I know even personally, I'm like, no one will see me cry. It's gonna be fine. I'll tough it up. And then I'm like, oh man, that was exhausting to just keep to myself all day until I got home. But, you know, I think it's okay to be upset, and it's okay to be like happy. I think you were talking about women's sports earlier on social media, and like women showing emotion or getting pissed, or they're like, oh well, they're just cocky. It's like men do that all the time. So why can't women? And it's like, it's okay to have a full range of emotions, on for men getting upset and for women getting angry and excited. And I think with social media, like it's a more of a presence, and we're seeing it more. So there's more commentary about it, but I think it'll eventually, I hope, shift towards just like, men are human, women are human. We experience every range of emotion, and especially in athletics, like it'll happen. And it's fun to watch. I mean, even as a consumer, you know, as a spectator, like it's fun to watch people get fired up. And I mean, it's not fun to watch people get upset, but you know what I mean? But
There can be some, it's like when you see them get really upset, but then you see them turn around.
or like bounce back,
Yeah,
and then
like I'm
there's a
thinking of
story
Serena
behind
Williams
it.
when I think she got injured it was a while back, but she got injured at a tennis match, and then like they had to do a bunch of stuff to her leg, and then she ended up like grinding out and winning. And it was like you see her bawling, and then you see her like something clicked, and she got like pissed, or I don't know what it was, but you saw that turnaround, and it was like that was like I get chills just even thinking about it. It's like it was like a pretty serious thing. They were worried, like, could she keep playing the rest of the season, and to turn around and do that well? And it's like, that's from the entertainment. Like, that's why we watch sports. It's like to see people do that.
The success stories out of, you know, whatever. But I think, the range of emotion, it's fine. It's okay. And then, but at the same time, if it's like what Serena did, she kind of compartmentalized that anger or, you know, that pain or getting upset, and that, you know, not being focused. And I was like, all right, bounce back. We'll deal with it maybe later. And then she ended up winning. It's like worth it.
So I'm wondering, is there anything in particular that you want to share or discuss?
I mean, you did talk about injuries earlier, and I think, like, I mean, I've had my fair share. And there's an ambulance going by. But I mean, I think I tore my ACL in high school, and it hurt like hell, and it was a long recovery. And I think even now the guidelines are pushing it even further to 9 months, where before it was 6 months. And I had an athlete actually, was she a freshman or sophomore? I can't remember, but it was, she ended up having this like freak fall and tore her ACL, and now she's finally back, and she's healthy, and she's actually stronger than she was before. But like, took 9 months. I was like, wow, that's a long time to contemplate quitting or contemplate, you know, bouncing back better than ever. I know when I was a senior actually in college, I had this like, well, I guess it started my sophomore year. I had a foot problem, and it just hurt, and the trainers did their best, and I ended up getting a bad diagnosis from a doctor on it. They just told me it was tendon, which it could have just been tendonitis at the time. But then after another year of competing, it turned into this stress fracture. I was like, oh, great. So they were like, you basically need to do surgery or wait 6 months, non-weight bearing, and it might fix itself. And I was like, I want to compete. Like, I haven't had a good season because of this. I want to, you know, I have goals. And so I was like, I'll get the surgery. And then I was out for, I guess, all of my first semester of my senior year. And I was kind of scared. I was like, you know, what if I don't come back and I don't do well? And, you know, I wouldn't have let anyone down but myself, really. We had a really strong team where even if I had no points on the board, it wouldn't have mattered. But I was like, man, that was a ballsy move, I guess, to get surgery the 6 months before my senior season, but I ended up coming back and was able to run finally without pain. And I had the best season that I had all in college. But it was it was scary, but I also was committed to. I was like, my 2 goals in college were to go to nationals and to set our school record, and I did that season, which one of my athletes actually just broke my record. So I'm a little bittersweet about it, but I'm super proud of her.
You ain't gonna make it.
Sorry, like, a couple pointers away, but no, she just broke it this past season, and I was like, the 2 goals that I had were what she accomplished too, and I was like, it's a cool feeling to accomplish your goals, to set a goal and to accomplish it. It's a very prideful feeling.
I'm wondering, because I think this is where the distinction between, at least from what I saw, of D3, D1, and NAI and D1 is the support that's in place for injuries. Because, NAI, I get injured, and it was like, you probably should go to the hospital. I'm like, that's a good idea. And they're like, you got a way to get there? And I'm like, my parents will have insurance. Just call an ambulance. Like,
right.
They're like, oh, we'll find someone to take them. Like, don't do me any favors, because I dislocated my shoulder. It was like hanging by my collarbone. It was really gross. And then I transfer, and I'm at a D1 school, and it's like, I did a physical, and they were like, maybe you should get surgery because this is pretty bad. And so it was like there was a team doctor, was it the whole training staff and everything else. And I remember it was kind of weird because like the first doctor at orthopedic I saw was like, oh, you just do physical therapy and you're fine. And the team doctor was like, I see about like 10 of these injuries a year, and probably, or 20 of these injuries, and do about 10 of these surgeries a year. He's like, it's a 90% chance it's going to come out the socket if you play again. And in my non-professional opinion, because athletically I can't go past 90, it's 110 that it's going to come out. And I was like, let's do surgery because I don't want to worry about like arthritis and stuff. But like that was a big difference in terms of like, because I think the first part I saw was just an orthopedic, but they weren't an orthopedic surgeon. And then the orthopedic surgeon in the ambulance, as we talk about injuries, the orthopedic surgeon was like, they're more involved, like they're doing the surgery and whatnot. And also because they're working with a particular population more directly versus a general orthopedic. Don't come at me, orthopedics, but this is what I was told by multiple orthopedic surgeons that work with sports, is that they see certain types of injuries in a sport to know how it's going to hold up versus not. And I just imagine, like, because you talk about, like, I remember my own frustration with that of, like, I don't like being injured, and I want to compete, but I can't do it.
I can't do it. I can't run.
Yeah, and so I guess for you, it's kind of like, what support was there or wasn't there, maybe at the D3 level, where if like you were at a D2, D1, or just even currently, if there's a big change in terms of like the supports that's there for injuries and whatnot.
Our trainers, I think there was 4 or 5 trainers at Rhodes, and like I'll give them all the props. They did what they could, especially given the guidelines that we got from the doctor. And the treatment worked, but it was temporary because we didn't know I had a stress fracture. But I think now too, and I think Rhodes, I know Rhodes partners with Campbell Clinic, so they've got that going for them. And when I did need surgery, I was able to get in really quickly with them because I had that like Rhodes connection. And I haven't had a problem with my foot since. But I know now too, the trainers have so many more tools in their tool belt, where like before, if I had you have a back spasm or something like that, and the trainers could only do so much. Now they have like dry needling or other techniques that have been learned since I've been in school. And even as a coach, I'm like, hey, can I get treatment? Because I'm old now and I have this, I can't stand up straight, which did actually happen. But like, I think the trainers are getting better. Even at the D3 level, I can't speak for all D3 schools, but I know Rhodes had a really good, they had really good resources for their trainers, and the trainers are really knowledgeable. So I don't think, compared to D1, it was, better, worse. I think it was still great what I had as support. It was just unfortunate that, maybe I can't even remember the process. I think I got an MRI, but I don't know. But it was like, yeah, it's just tendonitis. I was like, well, all right, I'll just fight through it. And then it got worse. So maybe should have taken care of myself before it got too bad. But that was just, that's the wrong thing in mental toughness to do. I was just like, I think a lot of people, they're like, oh, well, sure, it hurts, but I can muscle through it. And it's like, sure, maybe for a day or a season, but not for a year like I did. But yeah, that's my one regret, is just to not catch it early enough or listen to my body, where it's like, okay, it's been about a year of pain. You should have probably gone and got a second opinion or something else like that. But
having that experience, how do you, I guess, in what ways do you use that to, like, more or less help current athletes navigate that process? Because I think, going through that process, that gives you unique experience you can share vicariously and also intervene when it's like you see the athlete kind of like dragging their foot for a while and they're like, yo.
Yeah. Even with my like small subset of athletes, like I coach, like I said, like 6 people, I think. We've had a few injuries, and I don't push them to fight through that pain. I think I also try to learn like from trainers or from PTs. I'm no expert by any means, but I have a general understanding of like, oh, that pain is not a good pain, or that pain is maybe something that like maybe push through practice today, but go to the trainer or like go get it looked at. Because I had my athlete that ended up qualifying for nationals in the indoor season. She had this pain in her leg that she couldn't really run. It was funny, not funny, but I was like, wow, I can totally relate, because it's really frustrating when you want to jump high and you can't run down the runway. But yeah, I was like, let's not push it at practice, especially at that point in the season, May. You're not learning anything new, really. So I was like, let's just rest our body for competition and see what happens. But yeah, when my one athlete tore her ACL, I was like, let's just get you the trainer. Let's get it looked at, so at least we can know. Obviously, she wasn't walking, so there was no practicing or competing after that. But yeah, I'm a little more cautious, I guess. Like, even when I'm more nervous as a coach, I'm a little more cautious with them, especially when, it's chronic pain, because that's what I had. So I was like, let's just take it easy. See what the trainer says. If they give you the clear, give you the go, then like, let's, don't use it as an excuse, but let's definitely try to get it figured out before it gets worse.
What do you think is probably like some of the most important things a student athlete should think about when picking a program, when picking a school to go to? Because I think sometimes, we get these ideas and it's like, I'm going to go be like this All-American.
Yeah.
You get there, you're like, I hate this place. Like, I don't like anything about it. And then, a person ends up being really unhappy. And so, for you, it's like from both your experiences as a collegiate athlete and as a collegiate coach, what do you think are probably the things that a student athlete really needs to ask themselves and think about when choosing a program and a school?
I think for me, going through it as an athlete, I wanted something that, not in a selfish way, but like you're going to get paid attention to. You weren't just someone on the team competing. They were like actually caring about you and how you were performing, whether it was like good or bad. It was like, they know your name. They know how you're doing in school. They give a shit about you. And so do your teammates, And Rhodes is like 2,000 people, maybe a little bit more now, but it's a very small school. The team itself is, for like the women's side, under 30 people. So you're pretty close-knit. A lot of different personalities, but still at the end of the day, everyone cared about how you were competing. And then if, you know, the people that quit, it was like not just their performance, it was kind of like you saw that personality didn't quite fit or they didn't see themselves fitting. And those were like, I don't know, you could see why people might have quit, or they just didn't feel part of that program as much as the people that stayed for 4 years. Facilities are great, but, you know, that's not what kept me. I was still very lucky. My coaches, you know, with pole vault specifically, you know, you don't have one pole. You have like a series. And if you keep improving, you might need a different pole. And so, you know, they were able to provide buy any poles or buy any equipment that we were in need of. But our facilities weren't top of the line. They did the job. So it's not necessarily, like, that's not everything for me, at least. It's like a cherry on top if they're wonderful and great. But I think the coaching staff, and also asking from an athlete's perspective, like, I would want to know how long that coach has been there or how long the assistant coaches had been there. And like, winning records aren't everything either, but like, you know, what are your goals as a program? I think the athlete's totally allowed to ask those questions, because if a coach has been there 6 months and they don't know the program that well, that's not writing them off by any means, but it just kind of gives you that leverage of like, oh, well, hey, they might need me, or, you know, I might not be their main priority, or just anything like that once you know a little bit more about the program and the coaching staff. And obviously, I think that's the most important, is your coaches and your teammates.
I don't know how much it is a thing for track and field, but I imagine that it probably is. Thoughts on the whole transfer portal thing, or I don't know if you.
I don't know much about that.
Okay, I guess it's well, at least at the Division One.
Like playing one year at one place and then transferring.
Yeah, and then it's like
we had a little bit of that. Not at Rhodes, but at the like conference level and at the national level, there would be athletes that would go to JUCO or something, or whatever, a place that they ended up not liking and transferring and being all-star sprinters or jumpers, and they're like, where did you come from? And just like smoke everyone because they're 23 when everyone's 18. But I mean, I don't know. I think they're playing the game. If it's legal according to the NCAA, then they're doing it right, I guess. Or they're doing it the way that it's going to help them out. But at the D3 level, especially until the NIL stuff, like, what did you really get out of it other than, you know, a couple medals, which is important for some people, but it's not like they were getting deals out of winning D3 conference or nationals. Maybe they did, I don't know, but I think it's maybe more of a game, more of a chess match, and maybe the D1 level than the D3 level. But we did see it sometimes, and you're like, damn, they were really good. It's like they've been training for 5 years, and you've been training for 3.
I think that just having some friends that coach collegiate football, like, they've been talking about it. So no, like Lindenwood, they went Division I for pretty much everything, and they have like a ungodly amount of sports as is.
Yeah.
Which will be interesting to see what they do with that, because like they had like 30 like collegiate sports when they were D2. Like, they have women's hockey, men's
probably
volleyball,
like wrestling.
I think they even have a women's wrestling team. Rowing, and
polo,
then they go D1. Yeah,
polo.
And it's like there's like a split now with like, okay, well, these are going to be varsity and these are going to be like school sponsored.
Oh, interesting.
And then for football, they went D1 for everything. And I know with like football, like they've had to go into the portal because they have way more scholarships than what they did going from D2 to D1, AA.
Trying to get people to come.
And it's like, you know, their kids are trying to sell themselves.
Yeah.
And I'm all this. It's kind of like, you got any film? Nope. And so it's like a whole like strategy thing.
For sure.
For sure. But I figure like track might be a little bit different, because I think from what I know of like friends who ran track, they were like, the relationship with the coach is extremely important. And it's like, you got to go with the right person who's going to like, they're like, it's not like football where it's like, I can go have this great game, then have this other great game. It's
track is like, you were recorded at going 12 seconds. You jumped X on pole vault. You jumped that far. Like, it's, the results are in. It's not like, oh, you had a great pass. It's like, well, what does that mean?
It's like, did you have a great pass or that person had a great run with the ball?
Like, it's a little less.
I threw for 300 yards.
A little less subjective on the track side.
Yeah, and I think what some of my friends who did track said was like, you need a coach that's going to like develop you for the season, because it's like, you don't want to PR too early in the season. It's like, oh, I did this and this. And then the rest of the season,
great, but then you plateaued or tanked. The head coach at Rhodes has always been like, you know, practices might be a lot harder in the fall. You might feel slower, but like, he's done it long enough where it's like, all right, we're gearing you up to peak in April, in May, when conference is in April, and then nationals is usually like early June, end of May, but it's like, that's when you want to peak. And it's okay if you're like, my legs are tired, my legs are sore, and you have a bad meet in March. Like, that's not the time we need you to peak.
Yeah.
More football, it would be interesting too, because it's like, no, you got to peak almost every weekend.
Right. It's like, who's going to be like the hot hand basically with certain positions. Unless you're a quarterback, then it could just be like the favoritism.
But like, you got to play well every week to get the dub. But you can't lose every game until May.
Well, thank you for coming on and being the first guest. We'll definitely have to do this again. So I think right now it's like going to be mostly me interviewing people that I know and whatnot. It makes it a lot easier. But yeah, so I appreciate you coming on. I do know you have a wedding to get all ready for and whatnot.
Also my track teammate, so that'll be fun. But yeah, thank you for having me.